Ladies and gentlemen, today we are not here merely to discuss ideas, but to confront the very axis upon which your future may turn. The decision that can save your life is not a choice made lightly, nor is it found solely in the external world. It is born deep within the recesses of your psyche, often hidden behind the walls of fear, repression, and forgotten dreams. In the language of the soul, such a decision is not just about what you do but about who you become. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This lecture invites you into the symbolic world of your inner life where shadows speak, archetypes awaken, and transformation begins. What you choose in that inner space may indeed become the most vital decision of your existence, not just to survive, but to become whole. You are not just choosing a path, you are choosing whether to remain asleep to your deeper self, or to awaken and risk the journey of becoming fully alive. Let us begin. Most of the decisions that shape our lives are not the ones we make consciously at the surface of our awareness, but the ones we are driven to make by forces that reside deep in our unconscious. Carl Jung understood this with piercing clarity. He saw the human being not merely as a rational actor in control of every step, but as a soul in tension between what it knows and what it has forgotten, between what it desires and what it fears, between the mask it wears and the self it hides. When we speak of decisions that can save your life, we must begin by acknowledging that many of the choices we think we are making freely are actually being made for us, by complexes, by past wounds, by archetypes we do not understand, and by emotions we have never fully processed. The unconscious is not just a passive storehouse of memories and traumas. It is an active field of energy, shaping our thoughts, influencing our relationships, and often steering us toward repetitive patterns we do not know how to break. Until we bring these forces into the light of consciousness, we will continue to repeat the same decisions under different disguises, convinced each time that this one is different, that this time we are in control. To truly save your life, just preserve your survival, but save the core of who you are from fragmentation. You must come face to face with what is acting within you without your awareness. This requires the courage to look within, not just at your virtues but at your contradictions, your fears, your unresolved pain. Jung described the psyche as a self-regulating system. What we repress does not disappear. It reappears, distorted and demanding, in our behaviors, our dreams, and our relationships. A man who is terrified of his own vulnerability may become controlling or aggressive, trying to dominate others so he does not have to feel helpless. A woman who has buried her creative instincts may become bitter, critical, or chronically anxious, not realizing that her inner artist is screaming to be born. These patterns seem like fate, but they are the workings of the unconscious, soon acknowledged emotions directing conscious life. To reclaim your power, to make a decision that genuinely alters the trajectory of your life, you must ask not merely what you want, but why you want it, where that want comes from, and what parts of you might be sabotaging your progress. Insisted that the psyche seeks wholeness, every part of you, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, is trying to come together in harmony. When you ignore or split off parts of yourself, your decisions become fragmented. You may pursue success, but find no joy. You may chase love, but continually attract abandonment. You may seek peace, but always feel unsettled. These are not random outcomes, they are signs of unconscious conflict. The ego, left to itself, tries to control and manage life by suppressing what it does not understand. But the unconscious will not remain silent. It will speak through anxiety, depression, dreams, projections, and illness. It will create crises not to punish you, but to bring you back to the truth of your own soul. The question is whether you will listen before the crisis, or only after. When we fail to recognize the unconscious influences in our decisions, we fall prey to what Jung called the possession by complexes. A complex is a cluster of emotional energy centered around a theme: abandonment, failure, shame, betrayal. When a complex is activated, it hijacks the ego, distorting perception and reducing our freedom. You may feel an irrational panic when someone criticizes you, not because the criticism is valid, but because it triggers an old wound of never being good enough. In that moment, it is not your adult self making the decision on how to respond. It is the hurt inner child, the wounded shadow, the fragmented self. Until you become aware of that, you cannot choose differently. Your freedom is an illusion if you do not know who within you is making the choice. Awareness is the doorway to liberation. When you observe your inner reactions with honesty and curiosity, you begin to disentangle the threads of your psyche. You begin to see when fear is driving the wheel, when insecurity is speaking through your ambition, when old pain is shaping your current relationships, and in seeing that, you begin to reclaim your will not to dominate life, but to participate in it more fully and authentically. Dreams are one of the richest sources of insight into the unconscious. Jung called dreams the royal road to the unconscious, not because they are always clear, but because they bypass the ego's defenses. In your dreams, your psyche speaks in symbols, myths, metaphors, and images. A dream of drowning may symbolize being overwhelmed by emotion. A dream of flying may indicate a longing for freedom or transcendence. A dream of being chased may point to a part of you that you are avoiding. If you learn to engage your dreams, just interpret them intellectually, but feel their emotional truth, you begin to understand what is seeking your attention beneath the surface. Your unconscious is always speaking, always guiding you toward integration. The decision that can save your life may not come from a loud proclamation, but from a quiet moment when you finally listen to a part of yourself you've long ignored. Jung also spoke of the archetypes, the universal patterns that live in the collective unconscious. These archetypes influence your life more than you may realize. The hero, the orphan, the sage, the rebel, the lover, the creator, these are not just mythic characters. They are living energies within the human psyche. Sometimes, the archetype of the hero compels you to take risks, to fight for your values, to leave behind what is safe in order to pursue something meaningful. Other times, the orphan in you may be afraid of abandonment, drawing you toward people or situations that reenact the trauma. To live consciously is to recognize when an archetype is active and to engage with it wisely. Otherwise, you are merely being lived by forces you do not understand. A decision made under the domination of an unconscious archetype may seem right in the moment but lead to destruction. But when you recognize the archetypal energy and dialogue with it, you can harness its power without becoming its victim. Relationships, too, are fertile ground for the unconscious to operate. Jung noted that we often project our unconscious onto others, seeing in them what we refuse to see in ourselves. If you continually attract partners who are emotionally unavailable, you may be acting out an unconscious belief that you are unworthy of love. If you find yourself in relationships where you feel unseen, it may reflect a part of you that has not yet seen yourself. These patterns are not curses, they are invitations. Invitations to go deeper, to become conscious, to integrate the parts of you that have been living in exile. When you become conscious of your projections, you can stop blaming others and begin reclaiming your inner power. And that is when real decisions become possible, not decisions based on fear or fantasy, but on truth. In every life, there are crossroads. Moments where the decision before you is not just about what job to take, or what relationship to pursue, but about what part of yourself you are willing to acknowledge, what truth you are willing to accept, what old story you are finally ready to leave behind. These decisions may not seem grand on the outside, but they are seismic on the inside. To recognize the unconscious in yourself is to begin the long journey toward freedom. Not freedom from difficulty or pain, but the freedom to live from the center of your being rather than the periphery of your persona. The decision that can save your life is not one that denies your inner world, it is one that enters it, honors it, and draws from it the wisdom you need to become whole. To face the shadow is to stand in front of the very part of yourself you have spent years, maybe even decades, trying to avoid. It is to open the door to the unconscious, not to find light, but to confront the darkness you have denied, suppressed, or projected onto others. Carl Jung taught that the shadow is not evil in itself, it is simply the part of the self that is hidden, disowned, or repressed. Every individual carries a shadow, and the less it is acknowledged, the more it controls your life from behind the curtain. Facing the shadow is not an act of indulgence or introspection for its own sake. It is a moral act, a life-saving decision. Because what remains unconscious in you does not remain powerless. It grows in silence, acts in secret, and surfaces at the most vulnerable moments, often disguised as fate, illness, conflict, or breakdown. What you do not face within yourself you will end up facing in the world around you. There is a reason we fear our shadows. They contain the emotions we were told were unacceptable: anger, envy, lust, fear, selfishness. But they also contain gold gifts, talents, and desires we rejected because they did not fit the mold of who we were taught to be. The shadow is not just darkness, it is potential. When you face it with courage and humility, it becomes the very source of power and authenticity. To avoid the shadow is to live a divided life, fractured and masked. To face it is to begin the process of integration, where all parts of you are brought into alignment. and where your decisions become rooted in reality rather than in illusion. In every person's life, there comes a time when the old self must die for the true self to emerge. That death often begins with a confrontation with the shadow. Perhaps you notice yourself repeating toxic patterns, sabotaging relationships, undermining your goals, reacting with disproportionate emotion. These are not random glitches in your character, they are the shadow demanding to be seen. Jung believed that when the shadow is not faced, it is projected outward. We see in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. The person who angers you for being arrogant may be reflecting the part of you that craves recognition. The one who triggers your disgust with their freedom may be expressing the buried desires you've long denied. This projection is not only misleading, it is dangerous. It blinds you to the truth and places responsibility for your inner life onto others, making true transformation impossible. Facing the shadow is not about condemning yourself for having darkness. It is about meeting that darkness with honesty, curiosity, and compassion. When you see your envy not as a moral failure but as a cry from a forgotten part of you that longs for fulfillment, you begin to integrate rather than reject. When you acknowledge your anger as a signal that your boundaries have been violated, rather than as a flaw to be suppressed, you begin to act with integrity rather than explode in repression. The shadow, when seen and held, becomes an ally, but when denied, it becomes a saboteur. The journey of facing the shadow often begins in discomfort. Dreams become more intense, emotions more raw, conflicts more unavoidable. This is not a sign that you are falling apart, it is a sign that something deeper in you is coming alive. You are being called to become whole, but wholeness requires that you stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. It requires that you stop pretending, stop performing, stop running. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This darkness is not external evil, it is internal blindness. To make it conscious is to bring light to what was hidden, not to eliminate it, but to transform your relationship with it. This transformation cannot happen through intellect alone. You cannot reason your way through the shadow. You must feel it, wrestle with it, listen to it. You must allow the shame to speak, the fear to rise, the grief to move through you. These are not enemies, they are messages. Each emotion carries information. Each complex has a story. And until you let that story be heard, it will continue to haunt your life like a ghost from the past. Jung likened this process to descending into the underworld. It is not a journey of comfort, but of necessity, because it is in the underworld of the psyche that you find the treasures buried in pain, the strength forged in suffering, the compassion born of your own brokenness, the wisdom hidden in wounds. In many spiritual and religious traditions, there is a descent before the ascent. The hero must go into the cave. The prophet must go into the wilderness, the seeker must go into silence. Jung understood this archetypal pattern as psychological truth. The path to salvation, to healing, to authenticity, goes downward first into the shadow. The descent is not regression, it is preparation. Only by confronting your darkness can you carry the light with maturity. Otherwise, your light becomes arrogance, your gifts become weapons, your decisions become hollow. The unexamined parts of you will always find a way to surface through conflict, through sabotage, through projection. But when you face them consciously, you gain clarity, humility, and power. This decision to face the shadow is not made once. It is made over and over. In every moment you choose truth over image, awareness over denial, growth over comfort. It is made when you own your mistake rather than blame someone else. When you admit your jealousy rather than cover it in criticism. When you express your vulnerability rather than mask it with aggression. These small acts are revolutionary. They reclaim your life from the unconscious and bring it into conscious alignment. Many people reach a point where they feel stuck, lost, numb, or burned out. They change jobs, end relationships, move cities, hoping for relief. But the real problem is internal. The shadow has been ignored for too long. The soul is starving for wholeness, and no amount of external change will suffice until the inner work is done. This is why facing the shadow is the decision that can save your life. Because it does not just fix symptoms, it addresses the root. It does not just change your circumstances, it changes your being. And in doing so, it opens up a life not of perfection, but of depth, purpose, and integrity. There is a paradox here. What you most fear in yourself often holds the very key to your healing. The anger you fear may hold your power. The sadness you suppress may open your heart. The ambition you deny may carry your calling. But you will never access these gifts If you continue to live in denial of the shadow, you must turn toward the darkness, not with judgment, but with the knowledge that your soul is vast enough to hold both light and shadow, joy and sorrow, strength and weakness. Jung spoke of the union of opposites, the coming together of all parts of the self. That union begins with a decision to no longer fragment yourself, to say yes to the journey inward, to face what is real, even when it is uncomfortable, because only what is real can be redeemed, and only what is integrated can guide you. The decision to face the shadow is the doorway to that redemption, the first step toward becoming who you truly are beneath all masks and defenses. It is a decision that requires courage, but it is also a decision that grants you back your life one piece of awareness at a time. Individuation is the central process of psychological development. According to Carl Jung, it is the journey through which a person becomes who they are meant to be, a whole and integrated self, not merely a product of external influences or social expectations. But this journey is not passive. It requires an intentional break from the collective path. The collective path is the path of the crowd, of conformity, of doing what is expected, approved, and applauded. It is the unconscious default of most people's lives. To individuate, to truly become yourself, you must consciously choose to step away from the norms, roles, and identities that have been assigned to you by your family, culture, religion, or society. This decision can be painful, and it often brings a sense of isolation, but it is also the decision that can save your life, not just physically, but existentially, spiritually, and psychologically. The collective identity is seductive because it offers safety. When you follow the rules of your tribe, you are rewarded with belonging. You are told who you are, what you should want, how you should behave, and what your value is based on. But over time, if you are honest, you begin to feel the cost of this external validation. You may begin to experience a deep sense of inner emptiness, a lack of meaning, a growing restlessness that cannot be quieted by more success, more approval, or more achievement. That is the soul beginning to stir, asking for something real, something authentic. And that is the moment when the path of individuation opens before you. It does not shout, it whispers. It does not promise ease, it promises truth. And in that truth, you find not just who you are, but why you were born. Breaking from the collective path is not about rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is not about rejecting your culture or your roots out of anger or pride. It is about discernment. It is about asking yourself what truly belongs to you and what was merely handed to you. It is about questioning inherited beliefs, not to destroy them, but to see whether they resonate with your inner experience. Jung taught that the self is not created by adding things on, but by shedding what is not truly you. The persona, the mask you wear for others, must eventually crack. The roles you play must be seen for what they are: temporary, partial, and insufficient. When you take off these layers, not all at once, but piece by piece, you begin to see a different kind of identity emerge, not one based on performance, but on essence. This kind of decision requires immense courage, because to break from the collective path often means facing disapproval, misunderstanding, and even rejection. You may lose relationships, status, or comfort, but what you gain is something far more precious: your inner alignment. When you stop living from the outside in and begin living from the inside out, you reclaim the right to exist on your own terms. This does not mean becoming selfish or isolated. It means becoming whole. A person who has individuated is more capable of genuine connection because they are not hiding behind a false self. They love not because they need approval, but because they are free to give. They contribute to society not to prove their worth, but because they are living in alignment with their calling. The process of individuation involves listening deeply to your dreams, your longings, your conflicts, and your intuitions. It involves following the symbols that arise in your psyche and allowing them to lead you inward. You cannot individuate by copying someone else's journey. You must listen to your own soul. This requires solitude, silence, and deep self-inquiry. It requires that you become suspicious of quick answers and ready-made solutions. You begin to value your inner life as much as, if not more than, your external achievements. You begin to see that the real battle is not out there, is within. It is the battle between your authentic self and your conditioned self. And every decision you make to speak your truth, to set a boundary, to follow a creative impulse, to walk away from a toxic situation is a step on the path of individuation. One of the most difficult aspects of this journey is grief. As you separate from the collective path, you will grieve the illusions you once held, the roles you can no longer play, the people who may no longer understand you. This grief is sacred. It is the mourning of the false self. Jung believed that transformation requires a symbolic death, the death of the old identity, the old worldview, the old attachments. Only through this death can a new self be born, and what is born is not a perfect self, but a real one that knows its limits and its strengths, its darkness and its light, and embraces them both with humility. That as you individuate, you begin to see the archetypal nature of your journey. You are no longer just a person struggling in isolation. You are part of a greater story, the hero's journey, the exile's path, the seeker's pilgrimage. You find meaning in your suffering, purpose in your solitude, and beauty in your brokenness. The collective path may offer comfort, but it often leads to numbness. The individual path is harder, but it leads to awakening. This awakening does not come all at once. It unfolds slowly, in layers, through time and reflection. But with every step, you become more alive, more present, more human. Jung warned that those who fail to individuate become stuck in a state of neurosis. They suffer not because life is cruel, but because they are out of sync with their true nature. They live lives of quiet desperation, always seeking something outside of themselves to fill the void within. But the void cannot be filled by the collective, it can only be filled by the self. And the self is found not by conforming, but by daring to be different, by daring to say no to what no longer serves, and yes to what your soul knows is right. This decision is rarely made once. It is made daily, in small choices that accumulate over time. It is made when you choose to listen to your intuition over the crowd, when you create something instead of consume, when you speak your truth even when your voice trembles. It is made when you stop betraying yourself to fit in, and start honoring the truth that lives inside you. The truth that you are not here to live someone else's story. You are here to live your own. Individuation is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of real life. It is not the attainment of perfection, but the embrace of authenticity. It is the refusal to live as a copy when you were born an original. And it is the awareness that the decision to leave the collective path is not an escape, it is a return to the self, a return to what is sacred, a return to the source of meaning that no one else can define for you. In a world that constantly pressures you to conform, to follow, to adapt, the choice to individuate is radical, but it is also necessary. Because only by becoming who you truly are can you offer the world what it truly needs. The decision that can save your life may not be dramatic or visible, but it will be real. It will be felt in the quiet integrity of your choices, the grounded presence of your being, and the unwavering alignment between what you know and how you live. This alignment is the gift of individuation. It is the fruit of your courage to step away from the collective and walk the path that leads you home to yourself. True life-saving decisions are rarely the loud, obvious ones that the world celebrates. They are not always announced with applause, nor do they always come with certainty. More often, they are the quiet choices made in the stillness of your soul when no one is watching. They come when you stop listening to the noise around you and begin to hear the voice within. Carl Jung understood that each person carries an inner guide, a voice of deep knowing that is connected not to external authority, but to the self, the center of our total personality, both conscious and unconscious. This voice is not always rational, not always easy to explain, but it is wise. It does not speak in the language of fear, urgency, or comparison. It speaks in the language of symbols, intuition, emotion, and sometimes even silence. To hear it, you must become still enough to listen. You must be willing to turn down the volume of the outer world, with its demands, distractions, and expectations, and tune into something older, deeper, and far more personal. The outer noise is constant. It tells you who you should be, what you should achieve, what you should fear, and whom you should impress. It sells you identities and lifestyles. It defines success in terms of productivity, status, and control. It praises conformity and punishes deviation. This noise is powerful, and when you are disconnected from your inner life, it becomes your master. You chase dreams that are not yours. You adopt beliefs you never question. You react to life instead of responding from your center. But something in you knows that this noise is not the whole story. There is a deeper rhythm, a quieter frequency, and a different kind of wisdom that emerges when you dare to pause. In that pause you begin to sense the stirrings of your true self, not the persona you wear to be accepted, but the person you are when nothing needs to be performed. Listening to the inner voice requires solitude, not isolation, but intentional space away from external influence. It requires that you learn to trust your own experience. Jung taught that the psyche has an innate drive toward wholeness, and that if you are willing to engage with your own inner world, your dreams, your fantasies, your symptoms, your synchronicities, you will be guided. The guidance may not come In a linear or logical form, it may come through symbols in a dream, a sudden insight in a moment of silence, a persistent feeling that something isn't right, or a repeated pattern in your life that you can no longer ignore. This is how the self communicates, not by shouting over the chaos, but by quietly inviting you to notice what you've been avoiding, to pay attention to what keeps returning. One of the greatest challenges in hearing the inner voice is that it often contradicts the ego. The ego wants control, clarity, and safety. The inner voice often invites risk, surrender, and trust. The ego wants to be liked. The inner voice wants to be real. The ego wants certainty. The inner voice wants growth. These two are not enemies, but they must be brought into relationship. If the ego dominates, you will live a life of illusion, well packaged on the outside, but empty inside. If the inner voice is honored, the ego learns to serve the soul rather than suppress it. That shift is crucial because it allows your decisions to emerge not from fear or habit, but from truth. This kind of decision-making is not about logic alone. It includes logic, but it transcends it. Jung understood that the human psyche is not a machine. It is an ecosystem of conscious thought and unconscious material, rational insight and emotional truth, archetypal patterns and personal experiences. When you make a decision from your inner voice, you are not just choosing what is practical. You are choosing what aligns with your inner structure, what resonates with your deeper purpose. These decisions often don't make sense to others. They may not make sense to you at first, but they feel right in a way that logic cannot explain. They feel rooted, grounded, alive. That the modern world does not encourage this kind of listening. We are taught to look outward, to gather data, to follow experts, to compare ourselves constantly. But Jung would ask you to turn inward, to observe your dreams, to reflect on your emotions, to notice where your energy rises and where it falls. He would urge you to trust the signs and symbols that arise in your life not as superstitions, but as expressions of a deeper intelligence trying to guide you toward integration. The psyche speaks in symbols because the truth it carries is too vast for mere words. When you begin to take these inner experiences seriously, you realize that life is not just happening to you, it is happening through you. And that realization changes the way you choose. This way of living is slower, but it is also deeper. It requires patience and presence. It asks that you stop waiting for a voice of authority to tell you what to do, and instead begin a dialogue with your own inner being. It invites you to step into uncertainty, not with fear, but with faith in the process of becoming. Jung believed that every individual has a unique path, and that path can only be discovered from within. No one else can walk it for you. No system, no dogma, no cultural formula can reveal it. You must become your own experiment. Your own sacred mystery is not a solitary task in the sense of being alone. The inner voice is deeply connected to the collective unconscious, to the archetypal wisdom that transcends individual experience. When you listen inwardly, you tap into something ancient and universal. You are not just hearing your own small self, you are entering into dialogue with the deeper forces of life itself. This is why inner listening leads to humility. You realize you are not the center of the universe, but you are a part of something vast, meaningful, and alive. And from that place, your decisions begin to carry a different weight. They are not just reactions, they are offerings. They are not just strategies, they are expressions of alignment. Some of the most important decisions in your life will not feel urgent. They will arrive as subtle impressions. They will come in moments of stillness, or after a season of chaos. They may come as a deep knowing that something has ended, or that something must begin. These are not decisions you can justify easily to others, but they are decisions that will mark the turning points of your journey. They are the ones that will save your life not from death, but from fragmentation, from meaninglessness, from living someone else's story while your soul cries out to be heard. To live from the inner voice is not to avoid difficulty. In fact, it may lead you into more difficulty for a time. You may have to leave behind what is familiar, safe, or socially approved. You may face doubt, conflict, and fear. But what you gain is your life, not just existence, not just survival, but a life that feels real, a life that arises from within, that reflects your truth, and that contributes something authentic to the world. Jung did not promise ease, but he did promise depth, and in that depth, you find what no external voice can give you: your own sacred authority. The voice that does not scream, but sings. The voice that does not demand, but invites. The voice that, once trusted, becomes the compass by which your entire life can be guided not toward perfection, but toward wholeness. Every life crisis holds more than just pain, disruption, or confusion. It holds a hidden message, a symbolic invitation. Carl Jung saw crises not merely as psychological disturbances, but as threshold moments, as portals to transformation. The psyche does not throw us into disarray without reason. It does so when a deeper truth is being ignored, when the soul is asking to be heard, when a false way of living must end so a more authentic one can begin. The decision to view a life crisis, not as punishment or misfortune but as a symbolic call to transformation, may be one of the most important decisions you will ever make. In the midst of breakdowns, betrayals, illnesses, or losses, the ego sees only devastation, but the soul sees opportunity to grow, to wake up, to align your life with something more honest and real. The cracks in your life are not just signs of damage. They are the places where light can enter, where the unconscious content can rise into awareness, and where the process of individuation can begin in earnest. A crisis reveals what is unstable, untrue, or unfinished in your life. It exposes what you have outgrown, what you've denied, and what you've tried to keep hidden. It collapses the old identity so that a new self can be formed. Jung taught that when the ego is too rigid, too identified with its current story, the unconscious will intervene. It may do so gently at first through dreams, through unease, through subtle emotional signals. But if ignored, those signals intensify, anxiety escalates, depression deepens, relationships unravel, systems break. Eventually, the unconscious will find a way to make itself known, not to destroy you, but to awaken you. The pain is not the enemy, it is the messenger. The confusion is not failure, it is transition. These are signs that the ego must let go of its illusion of control and surrender to a deeper intelligence. In Jungian psychology, this moment is often described as the night sea journey or the descent into the underworld. It is not linear, it is not comfortable, it is not meant to be. When everything familiar falls apart, when you feel stripped of meaning, when your old strategies no longer work, you are being invited into an alchemical process. The ego is being dissolved so the self can emerge. The crisis is the crucible, and what burns away is not your essence, but the layers of identity that no longer serve you. What remains, what survives the fire, is more essential, more grounded, more whole. But to reach it, you must be willing to enter the darkness, not as a victim, but as a seeker. You must look at what is surfacing in your life, not just as chaos, but as coded information from the soul. One of the reasons crises are so painful is because they confront us with our powerlessness. The ego wants to be in charge. It wants clarity, direction, and success. A crisis often strips all of that away. In its place comes ambiguity, surrender, and humility. This is not regression, this is initiation. It is the death of the old story and the beginning of something entirely unknown. Jung emphasized that initiation always involves a symbolic death, the death of the persona, the death of the false self, the death of certainty. But from that death comes the possibility of rebirth, not as a return to what was, but as the birth of something entirely new, something that has been forming in the unconscious for a long time, waiting for the moment when the old structures become too small to contain your growth. Crisis also reveals the shadow, when the usual defenses collapse. When the persona is weakened, the parts of yourself you've kept in the dark often come rushing forward. Anger, grief, fear, jealousy, loneliness all rise to the surface, not to overwhelm you, but to be integrated. What appears as emotional chaos is often the soul trying to rebalance itself. The energies you've pushed away must now be faced, felt, and understood. This is why therapy, inner work, or solitude can be crucial during times of crisis, not to fix you, but to support the unfolding of a deeper process. Jung never saw crises as merely clinical conditions. He saw them as psychological necessities, turning points in the journey toward wholeness. What the culture may pathologize as breakdown, he often saw as breakthrough. Not always immediate, not always easy, but always meaningful, if approached with consciousness. The symbolic lens is essential here. If you view a crisis only through the lens of logic or utility, you miss the deeper message. A job loss is not just economic. It may be the soul rejecting a false path. A breakup is not just emotional pain. It may be the end of a pattern of dependency. An illness is not just physical suffering. It may carry psychic significance. This is not to spiritualize suffering irresponsibly or to ignore the material realities of hardship. It is to say that alongside the outer facts lies an inner narrative, one that only you can decode. Jung believed in the concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that arise when the inner world and outer events begin to mirror each other. In a crisis, synchronicities often increase. Symbols show up, dreams intensify, Chance encounters carry messages. If you learn to pay attention, life begins to speak a different language. This language is the language of the soul, and the decision to listen to it to treat your crisis as symbolic is to enter into dialogue with the self. The self is not concerned with comfort. It is concerned with authenticity. The self wants you to become whole, and sometimes that means allowing things to fall apart so you can be rebuilt from the ground up. This is why people often emerge from true crises changed in profound ways. Their values shift, their relationships evolve, their sense of purpose deepens. They stop living for appearances and start living for truth, not because they chose to be heroic, but because the fire of crisis burned away what was false and left only what was real. There is a paradox in all of this. The very thing you fear, loss, pain, confusion, can become the gateway to your liberation. The very experience that brings you to your knees can become the altar where your new self is born. This does not mean you would choose the crisis or wish it on anyone. It means that once it arrives, you choose how to meet it. You choose whether to run, numb, or blame more, to feel, reflect, and grow. This choice is subtle, but it is everything. It is the line between breakdown and breakthrough, between despair and initiation, between drifting through life and living with depth. You cannot control when a crisis comes, but you can choose how you interpret it. You can choose to see it not just as a detour, but as a doorway. Jung believed that the soul is self-regulating. When you go too far off course, the unconscious intervenes. It doesn't always use gentle methods. Sometimes it uses the storm, but the storm is not chaos for chaos's sake. It is a force that clears the way for new growth. And if you can stay present through it, if you can listen for the symbolic meaning beneath the surface disruption, you may discover not just recovery, but transformation. In that transformation lies your life, not the life you planned, but the life that is true. The life that emerges not in spite of crisis, but because of it. The life that carries the marks of your pain but also the wisdom of your survival. The life that is not defined by what happened to you, but by how you responded. Jung's great contribution was to show that the psyche is not a passive victim of experience, but a living system striving for meaning, wholeness, and growth. A crisis, when met with awareness, becomes a sacred turning point, not a dead end, but a deeper beginning. A place where the self takes the lead and guides you, not back to who you were, but forward into who you are becoming.